Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Zach. Here we talk about overlanding and tech, and today I think is a pretty heavily requested video, and I'm really excited about this one, but we're going to be trying to stay on a budget and build awesome little mounts for these rock lights from Harbor Freight. So I'm really stoked for this, and I think it's going to be a really interesting video. I'm going to walk through how I'm going to make these mounts, how I'm going to mount it all to the vehicle, kind of the lengths of wire you're probably going to need if you're going to assemble all of this, because just so you know, this kit is not going to be like the most straightforward kit to use, because if you look, most of these all just come with a red and black wire. So just to start out the video, I want to mention that this video is not electrical advice. If you don't feel comfortable installing these, you should definitely just take your vehicle to a shop. Electricity is nothing to mess around with, but I'm going to show you how I am going to install these. So basically, this is just not official advice or official walkthrough, but I wanted to figure out how I could use these rock lights on the 4Runner, and I think I've found kind of a novel way to do so. Now, I'm also going to mention that the way that I'm going to do this is not something you can completely purchase off the shelf. It's kind of DIY, and I'm going to be tying it into a Switch Pro's light controller. So depending upon your sort of setup, you may need a switch and a relay and some other components, but for me, I'm all just going to be tying this straight into a Switch Pro's. And so basically what that means is the Switch Pro's will output the voltage that I need for these lights at the particular amplitude that I'm going to need. So there's no need for a relay, and the switch is all built into the Switch Pro's. So essentially everything I'm going to talk about today is going to be using this light and then how to mount this light onto a 5th gen 4Runner. But I think this theory and sort of methodology can be translated to most SUVs. And then after we mount the lights, I'm going to show kind of how I wired it all up and ran the wires so that I could run this to my Switch Pro's so that we can use these lights. Now, additionally, and a reason why you may not have an electrical system set up in your vehicle yet, but you do have a Switch Pro's, is I'm going to have this trigger from the Switch Pro. So the Switch Pro has a sweet function where you can have a triggering line basically turn on lights on your vehicle. So my plan is anytime I unlock the vehicle, these lights are all going to turn on. So when even some of you who have like smart keys where when you approach your vehicle turns on lights, that would be something that you could set up here. But for mine, I don't have a super fancy push to start or anything like that. I don't think my key is a proximity key. So I'm just going to have it so that when I unlock the vehicle and all the dome lights and everything on the inside turn on, these rock lights will also turn on. Now, the nice thing about the Switch Pro's is just because it's triggering for these lights does not mean I can't just press the button on my little keypad and turn these rock lights on anytime I want when I'm out on the trail, that sort of thing. So I think this is going to be an awesome video. I think I've figured out a sweet way to mount these to the truck. So with that being said, please consider subscribing to the channel and give this video a like, because I think it's going to be a really awesome one, and hopefully all of you can gain some sweet value from this video. So let's jump right in and just kind of check out some of the hardware that I need to assemble all of this, and then I'm going to show you how we'll make those mounts and put this stuff on the truck. So before we start actually installing these lights on the vehicle, I just want to point out what comes in the kit. So when you get a set of rock lights from Harbor Freight, it's $30 for 2 of these lights. Okay, and each light comes with a rubber piece, one that is curved on the back like this, and then another which is just completely flat. So we're gonna only be using the flat one. You can just throw the curved one aside. And then each set of 2 lights comes with some different types of hardware. So you can either use this self-tapping screw, or you can use this bolt that has a matching nylon lock nut. What we're going to be doing for our application is we're going to be using that nylon lock nut with the bolt. This is my plan. Basically, you can go and buy these angle brackets from any local hardware store. And what I did is I took one of these to the store, and then I tried to line up the holes as best I can. Now, if you look at this side will line up nicely with this hole, and then I'm gonna drill a new hole on this side. So I have a metal bit that will be basically perfect for what we're going to do. So this is the metal bit I bought. It's a 5/16 inch metal bit. And the reason I bought this is because we're gonna be using some factory locations on the 4Runner to mount these. And one particular location that we're using is there's a ton of bolts that hold on my bolt-on rock sliders. And the bolts on those basically have a shaft this size. So we're gonna be doing 2 on each side where we're gonna use bolts from the rock slider. And so this is the side of the frame. This is gonna go right here, and then the rock light is gonna go right on the bottom of this. So that's gonna be on the sides of the truck. And then in the rear, we have a spot on the frame that we're gonna mount to that's just a factory threaded spot in the frame. And so that is an M7 type of threading. And so that's what this little bolt is gonna be. I'm probably gonna go and buy grade 8 bolts from some hardware store just because we get a lot of salt and corrosion and snow and rust and all that jazz from the Minnesota winters. So I'm gonna get something a little more hardy. But I have these galvanized washers here, which are gonna come in really handy for just mounting stuff to these brackets. Like I said, these brackets are 3 inches by 3 inches. We're gonna be drilling a custom hole on one side so that we can mount the rock light to it. My plan is to basically mount this to the bracket. So the bracket will mount like this, and then on the top of here will be the rock light. So when it's all hooked up, we're gonna have it pointing down and it should be perfect. I'm gonna choose bolts that are fairly high on the frame so that hopefully these won't get smashed or hit by any sort of rock that's going to be, you know, under the vehicle when I'm on trails. So that is the overall plan. And like I said, the 8 locations that I'm gonna mount these are 2 in the rear at that factory open hole that I'm gonna use. 1 is under the muffler and 1 is on the other side. They're both near the spare. I think it's gonna be a great location. For the rear, we're gonna have to take these angles and bend them. So we're gonna put it in a vise and just bend it. And then for the middle section, 4 on the rock sliders, 2 on each side. And then way up front, there's 2 spots that I found that are uniform that hold some sort of line. I'm not quite sure what flows through the line. It kind of looks like an air conditioning line, but I'm not quite sure. But both of those locations have a bolt at the same height that is fairly high up on both sides. So I think they'll be free from hitting any sort of rocks in the front. My bumper is going to take that before the rocks do. Before we get started though, I'm going to paint all of these with spray paint just to try and help also prevent sort of the metal from degrading. So I just wanted a quick run through all the hardware. All of these angle brackets cost me about $9. And then I presume the bolts and some of the washers, that's gonna be in the range of probably like $5 in hardware. All of this came with the lights, and so all of this should be fairly inexpensive, which is the big goal with using these. This is my wire that I ordered on Amazon. It's a protective wire, so it's got this really thick insulation around the outside, and then it's got the red and the black 16 gauge wiring on the inside. And even these wires on the inside are insulated. So we're gonna be doing this right. This is the wiring I'm using. I have black protective tubing that's gonna go around this wiring. And I'll throw a wiring diagram up on the screen a little bit later just to show how I'm gonna wire this all together. But this is not electrical advice, so make sure that you do your own research so that you have safe practices. But I think that the way I'm going to do it should be safe enough for my application. Okay, so I've actually got a small vise on this workbench that sits behind me in my videos. So I've got all of these brackets right here, and I've already cut them all, but I wanted to walk you through how I did it. So I used this little self-tapping screw just as a punch. So put that where you mark with your marker and then hit it with the hammer a couple times. I used this, it's just a file to help take off any sort of shavings or burrs that happen on the bottom of your cut. So, and I used this 5/16 drill bit. It's just a black oxide drill bit, and it worked really well. And then I have 2 of my bolts threaded through the light just so that I can double check the fit on all of my brackets. And then this is a extra bolt that I had for my rock sliders, so I use that as a template because all the other bolts I'm going to be using are smaller than this one. So this was my template bolt.
So, and this is my this is one of my brackets that's for the sliders. Only 4 of them are gonna go by sliders. And then these brackets all come with 2 holes, but I drilled this closer one so that this will feed through here. So, you can hook this onto the bracket and the 2 bolts go through just perfectly. So that should work out really great. And yeah, now that we've cut these brackets, we got to take all of them, and I'm just gonna throw a layer of spray paint on them to help them get a little bit more weatherproofed. Okay, so there's tons of different segments of wire that you're gonna need to clip and basically prepare like this. So you've got this protective plastic that's to help protect the wire from like rocks and other debris. And then this is insulated very thick so that it protects these wires. Then these wires will be insulated, and you want to strip each end because we're going to be doing some soldering between all these connections. So this wire I've clipped to the right length, and on both ends I've prepped them. And I used electrical tape to just hold this tubing in place at either end. So this is 16-inch wire, and then this is 1/4-inch plastic tubing protective, I don't know, spool. Comes in a huge spool like that. And yeah, so I'm gonna just do this for all the different wires, and then we'll start routing them and soldering the lights and the wiring all together so that we can get this going. All right, well, after about an hour of wiring prep, I have clipped and prepped all of my wires and got them laying up here on the engine bay. And we've even got a couple over here for this side. So basically the premise or the plan for what I'm gonna do is everything has to hook up to the switch pros. So I've got a wire there that's going to run to the front for a light here. It's gonna cross over the back and then come up right here, another light, drop down through the engine bay, and then show up right here. So there'll be a light here, a light here. It's gonna cross to the middle where there's a really nice place to run the wire. One wire will go back, one wire will go across. There's gonna be 2 on that side, and then that wire coming to the back is gonna split into a Y around the spare, and there'll be each a light in this back corner, and then 1 in that back corner as well. So now it's just about assembly. This back section here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna solder both lights on to the wires, and then solder this Y connection all the way back here. I'm gonna solder these 2 together. One will come this direction, one will go that direction. And I think all that wiring I can run from the back. Once it's laying there, I'm gonna have to do some connections where I send one wire forward, one to the light, and vice versa over there. It's just how I'm gonna have to do it. Some of this you can solder before putting it on the vehicle, but a lot of it is gonna also have to just be soldered right next to where it's gonna mount. And then any excess can be either cut or just zip tied out of the way. So that's the plan, and we're just gonna slowly keep on rolling. So this all just takes time. It's putsy, but you've got to do all of this prep work so that it's safe. Messing around with electric on a vehicle is no joke. You've got to do it right. So on to the next thing. So after a bunch of wiring, these all powered on, and they seem to work well. So now just have to start mounting them and zip tying all the wiring where it needs to go. So this is how you assemble one of the brackets. Basically we drilled those 2 holes like I was mentioning. We put the flat piece of rubber in between, and then there's the light. Thread these 2 Allen bolts through. We're gonna put the lock nuts on, and I'm just going to finger tighten them for now so we can get this bolt in the back connected to where my rock slider goes. And then we'll tighten these top bolts last. And there you have it. Got a rock light, 1 mounted, 7 to go. And then I'll come back and route all the wiring. I think that looks really good. I can even use that top hole to run a zip tie through to hold that wire in place. Oh, I'm really stoked how this turned out. So here's my front left mount, And I actually had to drill a custom hole in the middle of these two holes because that's where you're going to need. So we're gonna be mounting this right on this bolt here. That one right there. And for it to fit in there properly, you have to use the middle hole. So just so you're aware of that, I didn't drill this at the beginning. I painted and everything, and then realized I needed a different hole. Oh well. So unfortunately, my rear bumper's threaded, I guess, I don't know, there's threads in your frame that are pre-existing. That's where like bolt-on sliders go. I found a couple locations like that in the rear that I wanted to use, but being that I'm in Minnesota and your car can't help itself but rust out within a couple of years, those did not work, and so my bolts just started spinning in place. So that left me no choice but to build some little brackets for these that will go around the frame. So right now I'm just cutting these out. This setup is nothing fancy. We've got a sawhorse here, a couple C-clamps holding this on, and then your typical saw. And I'm just letting about 1 inch hang over either side. The frame seems to be about 4 inches by 4 inches. So we're gonna cut these, and then we're gonna cut a bolt shaft like that and put it on top and bottom. So stay tuned. I'll show what one side's gonna look like here in a couple seconds. Okay, so I cut all of these, and then just make sure you file down all of the edges on both sides. It's just important so you don't snag yourself or pop things on them. It just keeps you safer. So I filed down all of the corners the best I could, and now we're gonna cut the shafts so that we can start doing this. So for those of you that like a little more of a visual, basically this is what the bracket looks like. So there's a piece of angle aluminum, steel, tin, I don't know what this metal is. There's a piece of this angled material on either side, and then one of these bolts. So this is about 4 inches tall and 3 inches wide on the piece of frame. Then I cut each of these bolts to be 5.5 inches long, and these each pieces are like 6 inches long. And then each bolt is gonna have a washer, a lock washer, and then a nut. And this like brass sort of colored hardware is grade 8, which is especially good for like weather and corrosion and rust. So that's why I spent a little extra on this. So this piece of a like angled metal that I bought was about $8 at Lowe's. And then all of this hardware was roughly, I don't know, $12, maybe $15. And then each one of these brackets will mount with one of these bolts, and then each of those bolts will have a washer, a lock washer, another washer, and a nut. So that's kind of my plan. And then once I put this all on the actual frame, hopefully we'll hold the whole rock light in place. This bracket is actually going to go on the other side so that this bolt doesn't get in the way, but I just wanted to do that so that I could make a demonstration. So let's put one of these on the vehicle now. Okay, so here's the deal. When you're building this, make sure you test fit everything multiple times. Like, make sure you have 2 holes lined up for your bracket, and make sure that this will actually feed through the hole that you want it to feed through. And test fit everything before you tighten anything down. I've attached the rock light to the bracket so many times, and it's kind of frustrating. And so just make sure you test fit everything and drill holes. Like, these holes are slightly too small for this threaded bolt, but it fits through this hole just fine, but this one it doesn't. Things like that. Just make sure you test fit everything so that you can save yourself time, drill all the holes you need to, and then go from there.
So I apologize if it's a little bit windy, but I just wanted to show all of the mounts. So here's the back right rear passenger side if you're in America. And so this is the rock light, and then you can hardly tell it's even mounted on that bracket. And then there's some wires ran. All of the wiring, like I showed before, has this plastic protective sleeve around it. Similarly, on the front passenger, there's another rock light. So these spots I used these rock slider mounting points. You could use this screw if you wanted to have it lower, and likewise you could use this screw right here, but I didn't want them to get anywhere close to hitting a rock when I was driving on the trail, so I mounted them a little higher, and I don't get as much light spread because of that, but it is what it is. So here's the front of the truck, and this one is a little less obvious, but it's right there. So basically right behind the low pro bumper, this is the bottom of it. It mounts in right here. This is the plastic and start to the side of the wheel well. Here's my tire. So it just kind of sneaks right up in here, and the spot that I used to mount to, and if you can kind of see, there's that little silver bracket way up in there, and there's a screw that goes through that silver bracket. So I used that to mount the little angle to, and it worked out great. The driver's side is much easier to see. It's just right behind there, again on that mount. See that silver bracket back there? There's a better view. So there's that bolt I was talking about on the other side, and that's that silver bracket that it's kind of curling around it. So I had to drill a hole right in the middle of the little L bracket so that that would work. Otherwise it won't fit. So, but these front ones turned out great. I think I got them in a good spot so that I can keep them away from rocks, but also pretty close to the ground. This is the driver's side. It's not very interesting. It's the exact same as the other side, but figured I'd show it. And same with down here on the driver's side, rear passenger door. That is how the rock light mounted up. So I put the angled bracket on the inside of the little bracket there that holds that line, and then basically bent this small little metal tab that goes in that hole, and for better or worse, it seems to be just fine. Alright, and here's where all that custom work went down, and here's my back bumper, here's the height of my spare, so I think this is still plenty protected. It's maybe not quite as good as some of the others, but for the trunk I wanted this to have good coverage, so I put these a little bit lower. If they break off, oh well. I've got all this mounting locations, so I just bent this in case somehow that could puncture the tire. It's kind of jerry-rigged, but it does the job. So if you were worried about this not really supporting your lights properly, you could get thicker ones of these. But what I got, I think, is just fine. Then similarly, here's the rock light on the passenger side and the rear. And again, very good coverage and very far back. You would think that it's too close to the exhaust pipe, but I've checked it on my commute where I drive about half an hour or so, and it's just fine. So obviously you could connect a little like panel that could space it out a little farther. And I may do that in the future if I notice that there's issues, but for now anyway, it seems to be just fine. So I like how that turned out as well. And it's a little bit higher than the exhaust pipe, so I think it's pretty well covered. And here's the wheel, so obviously pretty covered because the wheel's like 2-3 inches lower than the light. So, and then all the wiring is just zip tied and ran all the way up to the front under the hood to the switch pros where I control it from my driver's seat. So that's basically the configuration.
So I wanted to just show you a little demo there, but oh my goodness, I think these rock lights turned out really great. The coverage below the vehicle I think is awesome. And I really don't understand the value of putting these like in the wheel wells of the truck. Just seems like I don't need to light up my wheel. I want to light up all of the ground around my vehicle so I can see it better. So that's partially why I chose all those locations, and I think it turned out really awesome. So thank you so much for watching. If this video brought you any value, please consider giving it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you like sort of overlanding content like this, because I like to do DIY stuff and I like to kind of talk about my mods. and also figure out ways where I can help all of you in your builds. So with that being said, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video.